person speaking.
Okay, so for testimony night, I couldn't find anyone. I asked Randy, but she has her women's group, so she might do it later at a different time. And I asked Steve Flott, and he didn't get back to me. And so he's like, fine then, I'll do it myself. And so I'm doing it myself. So I'm going to be sharing for testimony night. And so just as a reminder, the 4 questions that I'm supposed to be answering are, what is your testimony? What is the biggest lesson that you have learned, spiritual lesson? What are you learning right now and how? And what one thing would you like to pass on to the youth? I should be comfortable with all these pillows. What is one thing that you'd like to pass on to the youth? So I'm going to be answering those 4 questions, but as usual, Dad's going to open us in prayer.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you we can come together, and we just thank you for the tightness of our group. And Father, we do pray that others would come, Father, that we can learn from them and encourage them as well. And Father, I just pray for Paul tonight. Father, help him speak clearly. And Father, I just pray that all our hearts would be open to learn what you would have us learn tonight. That we would have a heart ready to obey whatever comes our way. And we just thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. This is weird. I've told every person who shared at testimony night that it's really relaxed, it's like a conversation, so there's no reason to be nervous or anything, but I'm used to teaching from like up or like almost at a distance. Like you guys are too close right now. And I always tell them like it's really conversational. So there's it's really conversational. So there's nothing to be nervous about. But because it's conversational, this is like the first lesson I've felt nervous for like since freshman year of college or high school when I started teaching. Okay, so I'm going to actually open, the first question is, what is your testimony? But I am going to open with a verse that is Matthew 7:21 through 23. Don't speak up my testimony. And so that verse says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. And so here's Jesus, and he's saying this really scary thing, that there will be many people on Judgment Day that said, that called him Lord, that called him their God. There will be many people who prophesied in his name, who casted out demons, like these incredible miracles that I've never performed. Have you guys ever performed it? No. Okay, so here are these people who call him Lord. They've performed these supernatural spiritual feats, and he will say, away from me, I never knew you, which is scary. And what this comes down to here with this passage is this word know. It's the Greek word gnosko, if I'm pronouncing it right. And that is a very intimate know. It's not a know like I know the Green Bay Packers because I know the roster. You know, I know Aaron Rodgers. I've never met him. I don't have an actual relationship with him. This gnosko is such an intimate know that it's actually used to describe like the relationship that a husband has with a wife. It is like the deepest possible knowing that you can have. And that's what God says for these people who performed these many miracles in his name, who called him Lord. He said, away from me, I never knew you. I never had intimate relationship with you. And this shouldn't be a surprise for anybody in this group, because we've gone through the first 5 books of the Bible so far. And every single time I keep saying it, that God is clawing for relationship with humanity. Ever since the fall, that's what he wants. He wants intimate relationship with us. He does everything he can to have relationship with us. And not only that, but like what did I just teach last week about the jealousy of God? He wants to be our one and only. All through the Old Testament, from Abram to Noah to Moses to the Israelites, he sets up covenantal relationships with them. And a covenant relationship, a marriage is a type of covenant relationship. I've said it over and over. It is a combination of law and love. It's saying, I love you so much that I'm going to make it a law that I have to love you. That you have to love me. I am going to put it into paper. I'm going to make it official so that loving you is no longer an option because I love you so much. That's the type of relationship God wants with us. A covenantal relationship. And so you see this, and it totally makes sense with the entire theme of the rest of the Bible. Because God's clawing for relationship. He's setting up covenantal relationships with person after person after person. And so now he says, not everybody who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. I don't care if you prophesy. I don't care if you cast out demons. I want to know you, and I want you to know me. I want intimate relationship with you. And so I grew up, you guys know my parents. Obviously, I grew up in a Christian home, but I didn't know him. I didn't have that relationship with him. And it's kind of interesting because on Easter, I was telling Laura, like, there's a lot of songs about like death to life and, you know, that whole thing. And so I actually started meditating on what I was like in my earlier life. And it's funny because I always thought of myself at least as morally strong. You know, my morals were influenced by the faith. I always had an intellectual understanding that you needed to put your faith in Jesus, that you couldn't earn your way, but it was all a mental thing. But on Easter, as I was meditating on how I was really before God got me, I was shocked at kind of how putrid my thought life was and what my intentions were and some of the things that I did, and it was just kind of eye-opening, this realization of how wicked I was when I was in middle school and really early high school. And so one thing is, like I said, my parents raised me. I was morally right because it was just a part of who I was, and Christian morals were a part of who I was. I remember in middle school actually like shaming other kids in my grade because of things that they chose to do or say or whatever it was. I remember shaming them, which isn't Christ-like, but that's how important these morals were to me. But at the same time, I acted on these morals. My actions were influenced by these morals, but the meditation of my heart, what I was thinking about, my thought life was really putrid. It was uncontrolled. It was unchecked, and I didn't care. And so it was like all of my faith was just based off of what I acted on instead of what I was thinking. I didn't think that if I thought something bad, that it wasn't wrong. And it was pretty putrid. But the thing is that when you're operating on the rules and you're allowing your thoughts to go unchecked, eventually you start operating on those thoughts. And I started operating on those thoughts in private. Nobody knew about it. It was kind of a way where I would be able to sin and then not let anybody know what it was. And so if your faith is purely operating on rules and you're breaking those rules in private, it is going to leave you very empty. In fact, I was just reading, and I wasn't going to share this. I was just reading. I've been going through Romans in my own time, I think it is. Okay. Yeah, I think I was in Romans 10. Uh, okay, so here it is. Romans 10:2. For I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. And so it's like he's talking about these people that that they were zealous for God, that they were righteous, but they were setting up their own righteousness. They weren't setting up the righteousness of God, and that's kind of where I was at. So I was sinning a lot, and I reached a point where I was very empty. Freshman year of high school, and it was New Year's Eve, and I remember feeling super empty. And as soon as I stayed up till midnight just because that's what you're supposed to do. But everybody could kind of tell that I was like hostile, I suppose, and whatever. And so it went to midnight, and I think everybody went, yeah, and then I just like left to go to my room, to be alone. And I was just crying, and it was really weird because I felt so empty, but I didn't even know specifically why. Now that I'm older and I'm looking back, I know why, because I felt like I had a faith, but I didn't actually have faith. I just had rules that were from the Bible. I didn't have any relationship. And so they were cold, hard rules. And every time I broke the rules, then it would make me feel extra guilty because there was no relationship there. It was just everything about my faith was about following these rules, and I couldn't even follow these rules. And so I had no relationship with God. So the fulfilling part of the Christian faith wasn't there. And then all the guilty part was there. And so I just cried, and I knew that something had to change, though. And so from there, I decided to start trying to read my Bible, start trying to listen to worship music. I guess in a way, kind of earn relationship with God. But it was a positive move. And so it's kind of interesting because I had a room in my parents' basement. And it's crazy how when I started to make positive spiritual movements, how the enemy countered that and really tried to insert fear into my life. And I had some pretty freaky, like demonic nightmares. And these demonic nightmares like really worked, because then when I would go to read my Bible in my room, I would feel too paranoid. Because all the nightmares took place in my room. One of them, I was in my nightmare. I was sleeping, and I looked into the entrance of my room, and there was like a what's it called when you can only see like the shadow of the
Profile.
silhouette?
Oh,
Yeah. Except it was like of a cloaked figure, and in my dream, I can't remember who I said, like, CJ, stop it, because in my dream I thought it was CJ messing with me. CJ, stop it. And so then it jumped on me, and it started like pounding on me, but it didn't hurt. It just, every punch, I just kind of like shrunk smaller and smaller, and it kept punching me until like the cloak, the dark cloak, kind of like just consumed me. And that, I suppose, sounds scary, but there's something to demonic nightmares too that's just a little bit extra scary. There's this weird dark feeling that just kind of like, you just kind of like feel it in your chest, that it just feels weird. And so that gripped me in fear. The other one I had in my dream, I got up, I used the restroom, I came back, and there was this short little demon-looking thing standing in my doorway again, and it looked kind of like a towel that you would like wring out. It had a creepy little face, but in my dream I saw it, and I literally froze, paralyzed in fear, and just kind of like fell over, completely frozen. And I was trying to scream as much as I could, and I was trying to, scream for help and whatever it was, and it was just standing there, and then it kind of like, the little towel thing, and just kind of like waddled past me out of the room. And I was just sitting there completely frozen, and it felt like in my dream for a really long time. And so there was another dream. And so both of these nightmares, they happened at the entrance of my room. And so I would be sitting there trying to read my Bible on my bed, and I'd be looking over my shoulder, and I would try and put in headphones to listen to worship music, and I was too freaked out because I couldn't hear what was happening. And so these nightmares really, they gripped me in fear, and I reached a point where I was like, I need to do something to confront these. I know that there's more than just regular nightmares here. There's something like spiritual going on. And so I decided that I was going to try and get up and try and rebuke the fear next time that I felt gripped in fear. So when I had decided to do that, I fell asleep, and then I had a nightmare that I got up to rebuke the fear, and they were just laughing at me. And I was trying to rebuke, and every time I'd rebuke, there'd just be nothing there, and then they'd like shove me in the back, and I'd turn around, there'd be no one there, and I'd rebuke, and they were just all like laughing and snickering at me, and I kept trying to rebuke and turn around, and I couldn't find them, and I was confused, and they just kept laughing and pushing me. And so then that stopped me from doing that for a while, because now I have this fear that if I get up and confront it, that's what's going to happen. And so this is going, I can't remember if this is a stretch of weeks, or I can't remember if this is a stretch of months, but it was affecting my faith. It was crippling me in fear to the point where I felt like I couldn't enjoy my relationship with God, or read my Bible, or listen to worship music. And then it was funny because my parents have a Bible next to their toilet, and I was taking a dump, and I was reading the Bible, and it was Psalm 23. And Psalm 23 is one of the most famous chapters in the Bible. And it's nice and short, and I memorized it, and that is what kind of equipped me to better rebuke. And so I was planning, I was like, next time that I feel this fear, I am going to stand up, and I am going to rebuke it. And so I did. I had the fear, and I remember standing up, and I remember reciting Psalm 23. That's, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, cleanses my soul, leads me on the path of righteousness. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, you comfort me, and yada, yada, yada. And so I recite that verse, and I'm standing in the middle of my room. The lights are off because I was going to sleep. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I was pretty aggressive with it. And it was something like, like the reason that you use darkness to make people afraid is because you're too afraid to show your face in the light. And I dare you to show your face, because we both know who's with me right now, and you're not welcome here, and so on. And since then, I didn't have any type of demonic nightmares for years, until even just this year. And then kind of the same thing happened where we prayed, and voila, no more demonic nightmares, And so for me, that was a big deal, though, because I think I kind of needed the shock. As I was going through that trial of those demonic nightmares, it was really paralyzing for my faith. But it's interesting how God does use the enemy then to awaken us to dig deeper into him. I went through that time, and it felt like it was bad for my faith. But after I got through it, I saw that it scared me into realizing that there's a spiritual world. And And it showed me also that I had authority, that there was no reason to be afraid. And I wouldn't have been able to learn those lessons. I wouldn't have been able to really start taking a hold of my own faith if it weren't for those nightmares. I probably would have tried to read my Bible a little bit and then fizzled out eventually, honestly. But God used these nightmares to inspire me to dig deeper into Him. God created me as a competitive person. As you can tell, I swept the floor in knockout.
We're still working on being humble.
Yeah. But He created me as this competitive person, and so I see this enemy, and that makes me go, okay, now I really need to make this happen. So I really started reading my Bible a lot, and that's when Luke became the youth pastor, and Luke invested in me like no other youth leader ever did. Like, Luke really believed in me. He made me a student leader, and for me that was a big deal because, obviously my parents would invest in me, CJ would invest in me, but this was someone who wasn't my family member choosing to invest in me, seeing something in me and inspiring me to dig deeper. He gave me a book, Not a Fan, which was a big deal for me at the time. The book centers around Luke 9:23. And basically what the guy did, he's a pastor, and he said all of the Easter sermons are about John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. And he said, but the thing is that's not it with the Christian faith. So many people think that they're Christian because God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that they forget verses like Luke 9:23, which is, if any man wishes to follow me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. And so what this pastor said is, on his Easters, he talks about Luke 9:23, that it is a change of life, that there needs to be a change. You can't remain the same. You have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross, which is a torture instrument in the Roman times. You need to die to yourself daily. And for me, that was a big deal. I saw that, and he made it,
Reachable.
Yeah, digestible for me. And so that was a big positive growth. Now, as I keep going here, what you'll see is that nightmare time was, for me, where I got my focus right. However, between that time, I don't know if I was saved at that time because I was raised in a Christian home. I asked Jesus into my heart 50 million times, So I don't know when I was actually saved. I know that during that nightmare time, I got my focus right. But pretty much all through high school, my heart was definitely still not right. It was still, most of my thoughts were pretty unchecked. But I was striving. I was striving to try and make my heart right. And so I don't know when I was saved, but my life, it seemed like up to this point, has been a good season, then a bad season, then a good season, then a bad season. And so I'm going to go through some of these. So the Luke thing happened. Then I started dating Laura senior year. And for that first year of us dating, I was really a mess. Especially because, I didn't go in with right intentions. I didn't go in prayerfully. I didn't really, in a lot of ways, I started dating because I hadn't had a girlfriend and I wanted my first girlfriend. As amazing as she is,
Yeah, thanks, dear.
I had bad intentions. And so freshman year of college, that's where then I graduated and I was on my own. And so up to that point, I talked about in high school, I tried to read my Bible, I tried to listen to worship music a little bit, but I was really forced out of it because I was no longer under my parents' home. I couldn't live off of their faith. I was isolated in my faith. I really had to make my faith my own. And I remember there was a time where I was like, I don't even know why I believe what I believe. I know what I believe, but I don't know why. And so I started trying to go through the Bible one verse at a time and break it down as much as I possibly could. And I had this big, thick book where I would go through and I would copy one verse at a time. That was my goal. One verse a day, and try and focus on that verse and break it down as much as possible. It helped because I was at a Christian college and I was in a hermeneutics class, which is Bible interpretation, is what hermeneutics is. So I was really trying to go through it. But still, freshman year of college, we would have phone calls, and I was a mess. I remember, I was still really trying to grow up on my own. I had a lot of doubt. I felt completely isolated. And that for me, especially I remember a couple months in a row, is like the winter months. I don't know if I would describe it as depressed. I would say more like distressed. I didn't mean for that to work out like that. I didn't plan that. But I was very distressed in my faith. And there was doubt because of sin. I had sin in my life, and I saw that based off of Romans that you were supposed to have, like Paul says, how can we who have died to sin still live in it? He says, what are we to say? Are we to continue in sin so that grace may increase? May it never be. How shall we who died to sin still live in it? And so I'm going, okay, so how can we who died to sin still live in it? I'm still living in sin. So I don't feel like I died to sin, but I'm doing everything I can, laying down everything I have with this sin, trying to do everything I can, praying that I will not sin, and I'm not seeing any life change. And so if what this Bible says is actually true, that when you believe in Jesus, the power of sin is broken, then either I'm not believing in Jesus, which I know I do, or God doesn't exist, because I didn't see the life change. And that was a big hurdle for me. So freshman year of college, and I should say, the sin that gripped me all the way through was always lust, and was always a lot of pride, a lot of self-righteousness. So I had a lot of lust, I had a lot of pride, and if you guys remember, I was teaching the youth group my freshman year of college. I was even a student leader in the high school. And so one point I want to make is, here I am trying to teach middle schoolers to follow Jesus. And at the same time, I'm having my own doubts. I'm still very much living in a lustful sin. I am trying my best not to. And I remember always talking to Luke, telling him this to make sure that it wasn't like a thing that I was like keeping to myself, some sort of secret. And we would pray a lot together and stuff, and he would give me advice, but it just felt like it gripped me. And it gripped me for a long time. So I was a leader, but one thing I want to say is, like, from the very beginning, I've always tried to use myself as the bad example. Because the point is that Jesus is perfect and that we're not. And one mistake that I think that a lot of Christians make is they put their hope in a Christian, or they put their hope in a Christian leader, or they put their hope in the church, or they put their hope in their parents for their faith. And then when that person disappoints them, their faith kind of comes crumbling down, and they go, God doesn't exist. But I mean, I was a leader at that point. I was failing. If a lot of you would have known about that, I'm sure there would have been a lot of doubt. But the point is that Jesus is perfect. And me as a leader, I knew that he was perfect. And so I've always been trying to point you guys to him as the good example, because I'm still in progress on a lot of sins, on a lot of issues. Churches, all those people, they're still in progress. Our hope is in Jesus. We are followers of Jesus, not followers of our parents. We're followers of Jesus, not followers of the youth group. We're followers of Jesus, not followers of the church. We're followers of Jesus, not followers of our pastor. We're followers of Jesus. And so if we're following our parents or our pastors or our church, that doesn't make us Christians. Christians means follower of Christ. That would make us followers of Jeff, or followers of Harvest, or followers of Tribe, or followers of whatever it is. And so you will always have Christian leaders. It's good to look up to them. It's good to look to try and learn what you can from them. But it's important to remember that they are human. Your hope is not in them. You're not a Christian because they're perfect. You're a Christian because Christ was perfect. Okay, so I was a leader, but in my private life I was a mess, and I was aware of this. And there was actually a couple points where I almost quit the youth group. And I kind of just dragged through that long period of time until eventually Laura and I broke up, for good reason on her part, because I was a mess in a lot of different ways. But that breakup was incredibly good for me spiritually, because it was able to get my focus off of trying to figure out how to date someone and how to figure out my sin, and it just allowed me to have this time where the breakup, the hurt, was extreme for the breakup. And that's when I feel like I really started investing in the relationship, and I started experiencing relationship with him a lot more, because I was in this place of brokenness. And during this time I was listening to a lot of Francis Chan, and James 1:2-4 is consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. I was going to read it. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let endurance complete its course in order for one to be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. That's what it says, okay? The thing is that that's not a guarantee. If you don't consider your trials a complete joy, if you don't use your trials for to try and grow yourself, to try and grow your relationship with the Lord, your trials can really work against you. When you're going through a trial, you are either going to become a lesser person because of it or a greater person because of it. You're not going to stay the same at the end. And a huge part of it is the way that you choose to face that trial. And I'm actually not backing this up with scripture, except for the positive. You know, if you choose to face your trial with joy and to try and grow from it, then you'll learn endurance and you'll be more complete. Okay, so then the opposite of that, if you don't choose it as joy, you're going to be pessimistic. You're going to feel like the world is against you. You're not going to grow your relationship with the Lord or trust in Him. In fact, it might be the opposite, because you'll be like, oh, the world is against me. Does God even care about me? Does God... But it's all based off of how you choose to face that trial. And I can't remember if that was a Francis Chan sermon, but I remember in that time I was going, I am in a trial right now. I'm hurting really bad. And I'm going to choose to use this to grow my faith. And I would lock myself in my room and I would get on my knees. And it was the first time I prayed on my knees, really. And it was so comforting. And I remember during that time, it almost felt like I would get a mental image sometimes of almost like a spotlight on me. Like everything around me was dark, and this spotlight was like God, and it was just me and Him, and all the dark, everything else around me didn't matter, and it was just me and Him, and it was the most comforting feeling in the world. And I would read the Word, and it was coming alive. And one trial for me always was, I would hear about people talk about their relationship with God, that He's such a loving God, that He has such a great character, such a kind character, and I never really saw that. But during that time, I was kind of seeing the lovingness of His character, the goodness of who He was. That's when I was going through John, and when He's praying to the Father, and you really see the way that He prays for the disciples and the love that He had for the disciples, and you can kind of see, I mean, like, that's how He loves people, and that's how He loves me, because I'm a follower of Him. And it was this awesome time of growth. And then eventually Laura and I got back together. That's just to tie that loose end.
What?
And then I remember when I was working at Scooters, I remember there was another winter where I felt extremely depressed. That was a time of depression. The other time, what did I say? It was distress. Yeah, that was distressed. This winter was depressed, and it's really hard to explain because I just felt hopeless, and there wasn't really a good reason for it. And I'd try and pray, but every time I prayed, it just felt empty. I suppose it was just a dry season, but then that spring, I remember I would open a lot at Scooters, and I would read a psalm as I opened. I'd listen to All Sons and Daughters, watch the sunrise, and it was great. It was a great time of spiritual growth. I listened to a lot of Tim Keller during that time, and that helped my relationship a lot. Over that span of time, this was more at the end of it, I remember the whole Ty Shenzel dying thing happened, and that challenged me in a lot of ways because it showed me to, I guess, to make the most of life. I've always been one who kind of lets life happen to me, and I feel like that's kind of why during that time I was depressed, is because I just felt like I hadn't accomplished anything. I hadn't really done anything great. And I saw the way that Ty lived, and it just seemed like he took advantage of every day, was excited about every day. He always, I remember reading his book, and he said, don't miss the opportunity that God has to bless you by blessing someone else. So when God tells you to do something, to go talk to somebody, there's blessing there for them, and there's blessing there for you. God's choosing to use you to make a difference in someone's life. That's a blessing for you. And I remember because of that, I actually had a few conversations with just complete strangers, which was completely out of the ordinary for me. And then since then, there's been very, very slow growth. All of the sins that I have struggled with pride, a lot of self-righteousness, a lot of lust are, you can see the way that they're ceasing more and more every day. A lot of growth. I got in accountability groups, which are good. And the beautiful thing now is the joy of the relationship with him. I think one of the biggest hurdles I had to get over was that rules versus relationship thing. That's very difficult because you see a lot of rules, and a part of the relationship is following the rules. Because what would Laura and I's relationship look like if we didn't have any rules? If I could go do whatever I wanted and she could go do whatever I wanted, it'd be a disgusting marriage. In order for a healthy marriage,
She said,
what?
If I could go do whatever I wanted, if she could go do whatever I wanted.
Well, it would be a disgusting relationship, though. It would go completely unchecked. There would be no faithfulness. A part of a healthy relationship are boundaries and rules. But there's supposed to be joy in the relationship. There's supposed to be freedom in the relationship. There's supposed to be community in the relationship. And if we were truly created for community with him, if that's what our sole purpose was from the very beginning, he created us so that we could have relationship with him, then when we enjoy relationship with him, that should be fulfilling because we're living out our purpose. We're living out our design. And over the past few years, as kind of the trials become less, and I'm kind of seeing the fruit of it. The relationship is so much more beautiful that you can't describe it. It's a spiritual thing that goes deeper than just words, where you feel that community. When you're worshiping, it doesn't feel like you're just singing a song. It feels like you're actually like having this connection with him. You hear of songs about when you see him face to face finally, for whatever reason, it's so much more like, yes, I cannot wait, instead of just like, see you face to face, you know? Like, it doesn't really mean a whole lot before you really start to experience this relationship with him. Yeah, and so that's where I'm at today. Any questions?
Usually it takes a while for people to
Yeah. Thank you.
battle buck.
That was very good.
Great speech.
Any questions?
Did you talk to anybody when you were like in middle school and you were going through hard times?
Which hard times? Like the nightmares? Or
I was wondering
when
if
you were
asked-
when you were like
yeah.
like doing like more rules instead of faith or whatever.
no, because I don't think I knew better.
Oh,
I thought that I knew what I was doing, but
oh, okay.
like
Which kind?
intellectually I got it. In my heart I didn't get it, and I
So like
didn't
now
know.
looking back, you knew like.
Yeah, now I can definitely see that it was just all about rules.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't have known to ask for help.
Well, even some of that pride issue too. You know, you might not.
Pride is hard to detect. Is that what you're saying?
Kind of like you
Pride
wouldn't
is
you
not-
wouldn't know
Yeah.
wouldn't know that you needed help. Kind of
Oh,
like
right.
you.
Oh.
I don't want to say know it all, but
Mhm.
kind of.
And I remember at one point too saying like, I've always done stuff by myself. I'm pretty introverted and I'm pretty private. And I remember at one point kept saying like, I always do things on myself. I always handle things by myself. And I remember during the nightmare thing, I was thinking like, do I ask for help? No, I'm not going to ask for help. Thinking like I can handle it on my own. And then I just remember being like, if anybody asks me what's going wrong, that's what I'm going to tell them. That is what I'm going to say. And then I remember overhearing CJ talking to my mom just randomly and just saying how the Christian faith is supposed to be lived in community. If you're isolated, if you're alone, you're not going to last. And I remember kind of like, oh yeah. Yeah.
So did
Maybe
you
how
tell
I'm doing
someone
this
then after
isn't
this?
good. I can't remember. I feel like I did. I was in an accountability group with some other high school friends, and so I think I might have told them, but
That's good.
Can't
Because that
remember.
would have been scary to be alone.
yeah. Any other questions? Do one of you have a question?
Oh, I was just agreeing. I was gonna ask if you ever told your parents about the nightmares.
Oh, I didn't until they heard my testimony. I shared my testimony once before in youth group when we were at Concordia. That was the first time they heard
That
it.
was one of the first things you told me when we started dating. We weren't even dating yet, actually.
Interesting.
And what's his face?
John.
Not
Carmen?
Carmen, yeah.
It's always a
It's always John.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so next one. What are you learning right now and how? What I was kind of saying at the end, his good character. That's always been a hard thing for me because I haven't really seen his good character in the Bible. So how am I learning that his character is actually good? How am I actually learning that his character is actually loving? This Old Testament series. You know, I feel like 75% of my spiritual growth has come from the lessons that I've taught. Usually when I'm teaching these lessons, I'm teaching myself. Like when I'm practicing it, when I'm reading into it and everything, it's a time of growth for me. And so as we've gone through the first 5 books of the Bible, that's called actually the Septuagint, right? Yes, that's called the Septuagint, is the first 5 books of the Bible.
I thought it was a G word. No? No? Genesis. C
Wait,
word?
I think the
Maybe it was a
Septuagint,
C
wasn't
word.
that the Old Testament for,
Or B?
no, it's the
Are you just
one-
going through the alphabet?
Yeah.
What?
No, it's one of those.
C, B, C, D.
It's like a good job, Jessica.
I should know this.
First 5 books of the Bible called.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus.
I bet it is somewhere.
Okay, so anyway, what?
Pentateuch, the Septuagint is the
Ah, I knew it was
is the Latin translation of the Bible,
Oh,
or the
weird.
Jewish one.
Okay.
I was gonna say P. It's
Okay. So anyway, this Old Testament series has been really good because I've been going through each book of the Bible, and what I'm saying to you guys about him clawing for relationship, it's because my eyes are being opened to the fact that throughout the entire first 5 books of the Bible, he's clawing for relationship, and it's eye-opening for me, and it's really cool. And so when I see, you guys know the Old Testament God doesn't always seem the most loving, and so when I see the Old Testament God setting up these covenant relationships with all these people, it's eye-opening to me of how loving he is and how merciful he is and how he constantly wants relationship. The other one is music has helped a lot. One of the places of growth that I had to have was in what I chose to entertain myself with. It's really interesting. When I first graduated, I wasn't allowed to listen to anything but Christian music all the way through high school. So I first graduated, and at first I was like, okay, only I'll listen to some non-Christian music just so I can kind of be able to have conversation starters with different people. And then eventually, it was just everything. I just listened to pretty much everything. No filters. And it's been kind of a difficult place because there would be times where it's I should not be listening to this. It's just not beneficial for my faith. But it's just the music aspect of it is so good, and the lyricism or whatever it is. And I think as I've grown in my relationship with God, I think the more my eyes have been opened to how much I just don't enjoy unwholesome music. And it's not that before it wasn't that, it wasn't the feeling of, oh, this isn't enjoyable wasn't there. I just wasn't as aware that I actually wasn't enjoying it, because it should rub you wrong when people are talking about things that are completely counter to what God would want you to be doing. And so lately, really for the past few years, I've eliminated a lot of the music that I was listening to, and not out of a place of I'm not going to listen to that music. That's not what I did. It was more of a just naturally stop listening to it because it just wasn't, I couldn't enjoy it. It's become less and less enjoyable. I'll be honest, there's still some albums or some artists where it's okay, that's good, that's really good music, but the amount that I listen to them is so much less. And I'm sure, as I grow more, that music will probably be completely cut out too eventually. But what I'm saying here is, as that music has been cut out, better music has entered in, and that music has, when you listen to worship music and you're worshiping, you're really experiencing God for yourself. He speaks through his word, and it can be a very intimate moment that you can have when you're reading the Bible. But at the same time, the words were not directly written to you, not the original authors, and you're not a part of the original audience. And so sometimes it can be it can be kind of cold. But when you are praying and you are talking to God, as long as you're doing so in a biblical way, because that's still our structure, you're experiencing relationship with him, and you're experiencing his loving character. And when you're experiencing his loving character, then you go back to the word and you're reading it, and you see how his loving character makes sense within the Bible, even within the parts that seemed cold before, if that makes any sense. And so listening to some of these worship music, a lot of this worship music and stuff, it's been really good. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. If you guys like what's on K-Love or KGBI and stuff, please enjoy it. But I've never been a huge fan of it. And so that's always been hard for me, because I've always felt like the Christian music, the worship music, I don't enjoy that music. I don't like it. People like different types of music. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just stating that. Gabe hates rap. And there's nothing bad about him hating rap. He likes rock. I hate rock. We have different tastes. That's okay. My taste is not KGBI music. And so for me, it's been really big to discover artists that are worship songs that are not what are on the radio and stuff. More twangy, acoustic-y,
Singer-songwriter.
singer-songwriter. Yes?
How come no one has any Christian rap radio?
There actually is. It's just Omaha isn't a big enough city, doesn't have a big enough rap following.
Make your own.
Start one.
Oh my god.
Yes, Gabe.
Wait, I don't fully hate rap. It's like
For the record. For the record.
So there's this band called Hollywood Undead. It's rap and rock together. Though why I like rock more is because some of the songs have like more meaning to me. There's this one song by Avenged Sevenfold called The Stage. It's a weird name though. You have to know lyrics to understand why it's called that. Though it says Jesus Christ was born to die.
Oh.
So it's like, that might have been God's plan.
Interesting. Okay. So, anyway, very good, Gabe. I'm learning about his good character through actually enjoying relationship with him, through music that I enjoy, and through this Old Testament series. The biggest lesson that I learned over my life as a Christian was definitely the covenantal relationship thing. I think that impacted my faith more than anything. Because before, I always had such a hard time explaining that it's not about the rules, but it's kind of about the rules. Like, God wants relationship with you, but then that doesn't mean that you can just live however you want. But when you understand it in the realm of a relationship, of like a marriage type relationship, a covenant relationship, it makes sense. Because what would our marriage be, if it was all verbal love, but there was no actual rules? If I didn't actually remain faithful to her, it would mean nothing. And then at the same time, though, what would it be if our relationship were all rules? If I just had to not be unfaithful and I had to do the dishes and we never had any enjoyment of relationship with each other, then it would be miserable. A covenant relationship, it completely explains it. And that, for me, that was like, okay, that's it. That explains it. It's not confusing after that. And so then once it's a relationship, there's no option to sin. It's not even an option. You love him, so you want to follow the rules. That's how it is. And so that was probably the biggest lesson for me. That's what it took. Because I said, a big wrestle for me was always rules versus relationship. Well, once I understood that, now it makes sense. And so now it's all about just changing my thought process, because I still a lot of times can be very rulesy. One thing to pass on to the youth. What is the one thing I would like to pass on? For freedom, set free. Galatians 5:1 says, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Therefore, sin no more. Look, that word freedom, for freedom, is literally like liberalities. It is just for freedom, for general freedom. It is for freedom to play video games. It's for freedom to enjoy soccer. It is for freedom to take vacations. It is for freedom. He died on the cross so that you could be free. It wasn't so that you could follow harsh, hard rules. It is for freedom that Christ has set you free. And for me, that was freeing. Because the wrestle was always against rules and relationship. But I read that and I just see how much, he wants you to enjoy your life. I'm going to use Laura and I as an illustration again. I want her to enjoy life. I don't want her to feel like she's always confined. Trevor once was driving, and he had road rage. Trevor gets road rage real bad. Trevor Larson does. He gets real bad road rage. And I was poking fun at him once, and I learned not to because he did not think it was funny. But this was a different time. He was having road rage because this person was driving like 10 miles under the speed limit. And it was really weird because it went from like this furious moment to like this spiritual moment. It was like this weird flip. But he was driving and he's like, oh, why are they driving 10 miles under the speed limit? And he whips around them and whips back in front of them. And he's like, I feel like it's a sermon illustration. He's like, Christians so often are afraid to sin that they live a less fulfilling life. They choose to not, like, God allows you to go 45 miles an hour. You have the freedom to go 45 miles an hour, and Christians choose to go 25 miles an hour because they're so afraid of going 46, of going 47, of going 50. Like, live in the freedom that was granted for you. It's for that freedom. Now, at the end of the verse, it says, so sin no more. So it's not saying be free and sin. In fact, it's actually saying that sin was what was holding you back in the first place. That's the bondage. People have it so backwards that they feel like if they're going to be a Christian, they're not going to live as free. But Christianity is the freedom from what is holding you back from living your most fulfilling, your most enjoyable life. Sin is the thing that puts you in chains. God didn't give us the rules of not sinning. First of all, he gave them so that, like I said earlier, for the sake of the relationship, But sins, every single sin has a negative consequence. He's also a loving father who gives rules to his children because he knows that if they break those rules, they are going to get hurt. He knows the rules are in there because he knows that when you start getting drunk, you're more susceptible to alcoholism. You are going to make destructive decisions. There are going to be consequences. He makes the rules to not lust because he knows that it will destroy your marriage relationship. He knows that it will make you have less respect for women or men, for the opposite sex. There are rules of sin. God calls them sin because they hurt us and they make us live a less fulfilling life. And so it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. So don't sin anymore. The sin's what holds you back. He wants you to live a fulfilling, to live a fun life. And when I read that verse, it's so strange because before I was listening to a whole bunch of unwholesome music, and I read that verse and it made me stop listening to that unwholesome music, actually. It's so strange how that works because you'd think I'd read that and be like, oh, there's no Bible verse that says you can't listen to this. But it was almost as if I felt this pressure to not listen to this music because I was always told that it was bad. And so then I felt like it was freedom. Oh, I can listen to this music now. So I was always listening to this music, but then I just learned that it was for freedom in general. And so then I'm like, oh, I don't know. I just don't even want it, if that makes any sense. There's so much more opportunity everywhere else. And I started reading more, and I enjoy reading because my thought was, I'm here for less than 100 years probably. I want to be able to read the best books ever written. I want to see the best movies ever made. I want to climb mountains. I want it for freedom. Because you're supposed to live a fulfilling life. Enjoy life. Don't let the rules bog you down. That is the one thing that I want to pass on to the youth. Any questions on those three that I just went through? So the right now and how, his good character through music in the Old Testament series. The biggest lesson learned, the covenantal relationship, and the one thing to pass on for freedom. Any questions on those four? Three.